All right, video 3, let's get right to it. This is almost the same as the first video. Good news, all right? We just have one extra layer. So again, we have this property that if everything is real, I'm not going to write it down this time, but if everything is real, that if it's m divided by n, so instead of 1 over n, now we're generalizing any numerator, it's still going to be the nth root of a, but then m stays as an exponent. And sometimes we write it that first way, and sometimes we prefer to write it this way. So it really just kind of depends. Depends. That was real smooth, huh? So sometimes we want one, and sometimes we want the other. All right, so can use both. It worked better in my head, guys. All right, so here we go. This is, again, once you have this property, it's almost the same as the first video. So this one's going to be really short, and then you can get on those homework problems. But just like in the first video, the parentheses are the biggest factor here. So write with a rational exponent. Part A is going to be the square root of y cubed. And remember in 8.2 on Friday, we talked about how to simplify this. We'd split the y cubed into a perfect square, y squared. And then there's a leftover, y. Now we'd simplify to get y times the square root of y. All right, but we're not simplifying here. It just says write it with a rational exponent. We're just changing forms, but not simplifying anything. So not to be confused with 8.2. Make sure you read directions on the quiz on Tuesday and your exam on a week from Tuesday, I think. I don't know. You guys have a lot of exams. I don't know if you noticed. It's hard to keep track. So again, the exponent, the numerator becomes our exponent. And just like before, the denominator becomes our index. So our index is 2. That becomes the denominator. The exponent becomes our numerator. So we get y to the 3 halves. And remember, 3 halves, that's 1.5. So when we simplify this, just like we did in 8.2, we got a y in the front and a square root of y. The square root of y is the 1/2 part, and the y out in front is the 1 part, 1.5, 3 halves, same thing. All right, and then we can also look at this in part B. If I have parentheses, the cubed root of 2x to the 4th. Again, when we write this, the 2x is all inside the radical, so the 2x will all be inside of parentheses. The exponent, that 4, is still our exponent. Just like over here, right? The exponent of 3 was still our exponent, and the index becomes our denominator of our exponent. We get 2x to the 4/3. You can think of 4/3 as 1 1/3, which is what it would look like if you simplified it. All right, let's do 2 more, and then I shall unleash the homework problems on you. Part C will be the square root of 3a over 4b cubed. And this one looks awful, but don't worry. I'm not asking you to simplify anything, just to write it with a rational exponent. Part D will be 2 times the square root of 3x cubed. Now, part D is much more of a headache than part C. All right? Part D is the real headache, but C is not so bad. We just look at everything inside the parentheses, everything inside the radical here, and write it again, 3a over 4b. Now, all of this has an exponent of 3, and all of it is inside a radical. Specifically, it's inside a square root. Square root is a denominator of 2 for our exponent. So C is actually relatively straightforward. D is not straightforward. D is a trick question. This is the rare occasion where I give you something worse than the actual homework problems. Okay? Usually the homework problems are significantly worse than what we have time to talk about in class. So the 2, there's nothing going on with the 2. There's no exponent, there's no radical, The 2 is just a 2. So don't do anything fancy with that 2. Just write it down again. But now you have 2 problems here, right? Look at the inside. Both of these things are getting square rooted. So both of them have an exponent of 1/2. But only the x cubed has that cubed. So you can't write 3x to the 3/2 because the 3 doesn't have the cube. You have a couple options on how to do this. One of the ways to do this, and this is how I would do this, is say, okay, they're both in the radical, they're both in the square root. And you could write this like so. This would be a perfectly acceptable answer. Another way you could write this as 2 times 3 to the 1/2 times x to the 3/2. And be very careful to not combine these first 2. Again, we cannot combine these numbers because only one has an exponent. So can't combine unless they have the same exponent. So again, this really is kind of a trick question. And again, it all has to do with what thing gets what. So the 2 gets nothing. The 3 is in a square root. So the 3 gets the 1/2. We wrote the 1/2 like that for the 3 and like that for the 3. The x is in the square root and has an exponent. So exponent and square root, or we can combine it over here. So just be a little careful with something like this last one. Be very, very aware. There's a lot of easy things to trip up on. Good luck, and feel free to let me know if you have any questions on this, because as you're watching this video, I will probably be available.